G'day everyone and welcome back to Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al. I'm really excited to kick off 2026 with you. We've just finished our first full calendar year of podcasts and I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's listened, shared an episode, sent a message or stopped me for a chat. I genuinely appreciate it. This year we're aiming to bring you even more great guests with plenty of practical conversations you can take straight back to your own operation. We'll be featuring more local producers too. People right here in our region who are doing good things, having a crack, who've got great stories worth sharing. I'm also pleased to say that we've got some regular voices returning. Chelsea from Herd Solutions will be joining us on a monthly basis with veterinary updates and timely animal health advice. And Morg from Elders is back as well, committed to a monthly livestock market update to help us make sense of what's happening and what it might mean on farm. So whether you're listening in the ute, on the tractor or in the yards, welcome back. I'm glad you're here and I hope you enjoy what we've got coming in 2026. Welcome everyone to Digging Deeper and welcome to Chelsea. How you going, mate?
I'm good, thanks, Al. How are you?
Not too bad. Now, if anyone is watching or possibly picking up on sound quality, we're actually doing our very first Digging Deeper remote podcast. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's budget cuts for fuel, Al. Not really.
We're listening we're trying to drive less and it's costing us a fortune. No, you're actually away, so you're tied up the rest of this week. You're going interstate, I understand.
Not quite, but it's the other side of Melbourne. So, yeah, Mount Macedon for this little conference. So,
Oh, right. I thought it was South Australia for some reason, but that's all right. Mount Macedon.
no, it's about halfway there. So.
Yeah. And what's over there? Charles, you want to explain to listeners what you're doing over there?
Yeah, so because we run better beef groups through Agriculture Victoria, we have to go to an annual conference to meet with all the other better beef group coordinators. So it's a facilitators conference. So yeah, it goes for 2 days. And basically we get a bit of a roundup of all the projects and activities that are happening within Agriculture Victoria as a bit of an advisor update as well. So it'll be my first time attending it. So that might be why I sound a little bit vague because I don't entirely know what I've signed myself up for. But yeah, traditionally Alison's done this job, but it's me this year. So
right, so just you from Herd Solutions heading over?
Correct.
Yep. And any R&R while you're over there, eh?
Hopefully, yeah. It'd be nice to get away for a night, get away from the horses for a night. So, yeah, no, that'll be nice.
Yeah, while we're on the horse, how's that toe going?
Yeah, toes healed up really, really well. So, not quite up to running yet. I went to a different conference a few weeks ago, and while I was on holidays in Brisbane, I thought I'd try going for a few jogs, and it didn't love that too much. But in terms of everything else, it's holding up okay. But the doctor did sort of tell me it'd take a few months for the pain to fully sort of go away. So I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah. How much is that psychological, do you think, and how much is actual physical pain?
A bit of both. It's certainly, regardless of what I do every morning when I wake up and take the first few steps after I get out of bed, it still hurts consistently every single day. I wonder if it's just because it's cold in the morning and it's not quite warmed up. But certainly there is a psychological element where I still subconsciously am protecting it in a way as well, just in the sense that, when I'm leading the horse, I'm always making sure that if I'm going to get one foot stood on it, it's the other foot, not the bad one. So just little things like that, I'm always keeping it on the safer side and sort of sacrificing the other foot, rightly or wrongly. But it is something I have noticed. So
yeah, well, I've had a few knee operations, some ACL reconstructions, and I think that was the hardest thing to overcome is that psychological barrier that you protect this thing for so long and all of a sudden it gives you the all clear, and in the back of your mind you know it's all clear, but you still run around or move around like it is about to snap at any one time. So
yeah,
and
certainly like handling the horses, I'm very very scared of getting it stood on, and I have had a couple of near misses, and yeah, it certainly gets your heart rate up, that's for sure. So
yeah, what's your thought on steel cap boots around horses?
I've never really worn them up until recently. I do now. And previously I'd just wear leather shoes and that was just how I did things, and I didn't wear steel caps. And I also have heard horror stories of people that have been wearing steel caps and then the steel's bent and snapped the toe off under force as well. After doing a bit of reading after this accident, though, I think there is, not all steel caps are made the same, and there are some that are probably better rated and better quality than others.
Right, yeah. So what brands can you endorse then, Chelsea, after your research of steel caps?
I think it was more to do with the safety rating on them, but I didn't honestly look too much further. I think it was more just about checking that it's got some sort of safety rating on the side. Was about as far as I got when you look at the barcode or something.
That's not really useful to anything else, so.
No, it's not. But what I definitely have started doing, especially in light of what happened, is I'll saddle up the horse with my steel cap shoes and then put my riding boots on. Once you're on the horse, obviously, it's slightly low risk, not low risk of getting stood on, but that's certainly something I've changed as a result of having it injured. So.
And how's the horse come back into work? All right, has he?
Yeah, he was really good. I took him to a couple of shows over Easter, and he's been excellent. So, spent a lot of time just hanging out with him on the ground while I was out of action, and he'd come back into work really well. So.
Any good results? Any notable results, Chelsea?
No, he's still jumping in. He's going okay. But because he's sort of competing at the lower grades, there's a lot of kids on their ponies that just go so fast, and it'd be quite detrimental to his progress if I tried to chase him around at that speed. Because he's such a big horse, he needs to learn to sit up and jump things properly if he wants to jump really big jumps down the line. So, it's certainly setting them up to, if you let them rush at lower heights, to, long-term have good trainability, if that makes sense. So, we're just we're just cruising around the little stuff at the moment and getting beaten by little kids. So,
what's the plan then? How long, you said you got to train him up, how long till you're sort of flat out on the bigger jumps, I guess?
Unfortunately, that's up to the horse and not up to me.
Right.
Especially because we've had so many setbacks like this. This season's been a bit of a write-off for me between the car crash and the broken foot. So, it is a little bit frustrating and disheartening because, we haven't really made much progress on the height that he was jumping 12 months ago. But unfortunately, that's just life, and, setbacks happen, unfortunately. I sort of had a goal of him competing in sort of metre 10 classes by the end of this year, and we haven't quite got there. We're doing it at home, but not quite at the shows. And then, eventually I'd like him to be jumping sort of metre 30 to metre 40 classes, but that's probably another 4 or 5 years ago. And 4 or 5 years away, realistically. So it's a long journey.
And what's the prime for a jumping horse, prime age?
That's a good question. And certainly a lot of people that would argue that, if you sort of work them too hard when they're younger, you're going to end up with a horse that has to retire a lot earlier because of soundness problems. So I'm hoping, because I haven't sort of worked him too hard as a young horse, that he can keep going until he's sort of 18 to 20, maybe even beyond that. But certainly, that takes a lot of good management decisions to keep them sound for that long. So, yeah.
All right. Well, let's change topics slightly. Not the reason you're on for the podcast this week. We'll talk about it in a second. But we had a farrier out this morning. We got an older pony, my daughter's ponies, and the farrier said, looks like he's got Cushing's. Now, from a veterinary point of view, what is Cushing's? And it sounds a fairly sort of terminal illness. Am I correct in thinking that? Or how do we diagnose it? What actually is it?
I wouldn't
Question off the cuff, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's not something I would call terminal, but it is lifelong. So Cushing's is caused by a brain tumour, which sounds really scary and extreme, but it's not the sort of tumour that causes like neurological deficits or anything like that. The reason that it's a problem is because it secretes steroid hormone, like stress hormone. So it produces way too much of this stress hormone, and so what ends up happening is, particularly for horses, they can sometimes get coat changes and they can sometimes have trouble keeping weight on. And the other big problem we see with Cushing's is that it can upset the insulin regulation with their metabolic system as well. So what happens is they've got this persistent high level of insulin circulating around because there is a lot of resistance in the tissues to insulin itself. And what can happen as a consequence of that if it's not controlled is we get laminitis, which we have actually talked about in the cattle on previous podcasts. And laminitis is a very sort of broad disease process that can occur because of lots of different causes. And one of the causes in horses is this Cushing's disease. And when we sort of think about laminitis, how I sort of explain it to people is that when we've got people that have got diabetes, which is a very similar sort of condition where we've got constant high levels of insulin, we start to get these gangrene type fingers and sometimes entire limbs. And the reason for that gangrene is thought to be that the insulin upsets the health of the blood vessels in extremities. And the laminitis in these ponies with Cushing's is a very similar thing in the feet. So the insulin, when it's secreted in high amounts for persisting high levels of time, will start to upset the blood vessels in the feet. And so then we get this breakdown of the laminar surfaces that hold the bone in the hoof capsule correctly.
Right. And so I'm assuming there's like a lifelong sort of feed management plan with the Cushings. Is that what it comes down to a lot of, or is there medicines?
There is also a medication you can put them on called Presend. So that helps to reduce the amount of insulin that gets released by sort of down regulating that whole hormonal cascade as well. So there's a lifelong medication. It's a tablet that you can put in a treat and you give it to them once a day. But also, like all things with laminitis, minimising sugar in the diet is a big part of that management factor as well.
And what's the best way to diagnose it confidently?
Well, actually, now's probably the best time to test for it. So usually we take a blood sample for a hormone called ACTH. So it's to do with that sort of hormonal cascade of how hormones often start in the brain where that functional tumor is, and then it will set off a cascade of other hormonal responses. So we can test directly for the ACTH hormone, which is produced by this brain tumor. And if it's high, then that's highly indicative that horse has got Cushing's disease.
Yep. And I might get a vet call out for a equine. Oh, I know you don't do them, but we'll see how you do after you get back. Now, let's change gears. You actually want to talk about Fluke today because we're coming into the fluky season, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, and now's sort of the time we want to think about controlling for Fluke as well, because we're coming into the winter months as well. When we think about strategic control of Fluke, that's when we would look at putting in a strategic Fluke drench. The other reason I thought it might be interesting to talk about is just because I know a lot of people are starting to think about offloading their empty cows coming into winter. And so what often ends up happening is those cows go direct to slaughter, and we get a lot of producers that give us phone calls with animal health data that comes with the carcass report, and often they have Fluke on them as well. So I thought it might be a good chance to have a chat about liver Fluke as well, with all that in mind.
Okay, so let's get straight into it. What actually is Fluke in the livestock?
So liver Fluke, as the name sort of implies, it's a parasite that likes to live in the liver of sheep and cattle. So we can very rarely get infestations in other species. Like there has been, minor case reports of it in horses and people, but the overwhelming majority of animals that are susceptible is ruminants. And what happens is the liver Fluke like to obviously live in the liver, as the name implies. And the biggest sort of thing to be aware of with liver Fluke is that not all properties will have it, because not all properties are conducive to having it established on their property. And the reason for that is that there is a very specific number of snail species that need to be on the property to act as an intermediate host. So when we talk about the host stages, the cattle and sheep are what we call the primary host. So they're the end stage host. But we can also have these intermediate hosts, which are essential for liver fluke with the snail. And the intermediate host is responsible for taking a sort of less mature larval stage and making it into a larval stage that's actually able to get into the sheep and the cow. So if we don't have that fluke, if we don't have that snail, we don't have that completion of the life cycle.
Now that snail is obviously a specific type of snail. You're saying we can control snail, or sometimes those snails not on the property, they don't move between properties well, or is it environmental?
It's exactly right. It's environmental. So properties that are conducive to snail populations are more likely to have liver fluke. So when we talk about those types of environments, if there's a slow-flowing creek or river going through the property, any sort of marshy, swampy environments, or also any sort of irrigation properties can sort of lend themselves to the survival of these snails. So yeah, well-drained, flat sort of country with no slow-flowing water, and water troughs rather than other water sources are much lower risk.
Yeah. Now, what I understand, fluke can't be really passed from animal to animal either. So is that right?
So what happens is the cows will shed some eggs in their feces, very similar to any other sort of species of worm. But what happens is the eggs then turn into a miracidia is the correct term for it. And then they have to enter the snail to complete the life cycle. So they complete a phase of shedding within the snail itself. And so what comes out of the snail is what we call a metacercariae, which is infective, to the sheep and the cows. So the stages that come prior to that can't enter the cows and cause disease, and same for sheep. So that snail has to be there to allow them to molt into that metacercariae stage.
Yeah. So what I was thinking along the lines of the biosecurity or introducing stock to a property, if you're not experiencing fluke in the past, it's not a concern bringing in fluky cattle or fluky sheep?
Yeah, correct. So if you don't have that species of snail on your property and you had cattle that bought some fluky in, the risk is obviously lower because of the fact that you don't have that snail there to complete the life cycle. I guess the challenge, and where we would always advise people to do a fluke biosecurity drench on arrival, is just because it's really hard to know for certain that you don't have a snail, and it can also, the amount of snail population can vary from year to year depending on the climate as well. So, and certainly just because we know that the snails are not there right now doesn't mean they might not be there in the future. So we've always advised people to do a fluke controlled drench, particularly if you suspect that they're coming from a fluke endemic area. But yes, you are absolutely correct that if you don't have the snail, you're not likely to have any large impacts from the cattle coming onto the property.
Yep. So how do we actually find out whether we got the snail? Can we just scratch around in the likely areas and look for them, or are they smaller than that, or what do we do?
You certainly can go looking for them, and I'll tell you a funny story about that in a minute. But the best way to really know is to ask the cow. So what we generally say for people that, if they aren't sure if they've got liver fluke on their property, the best way to know is to get some cows that, have basically lived on their whole lives on your property. So what we can do is an antibody test. So if there's an antibody response that implies that there's been exposure at some point, then we can use that as a really good screen. And the good thing about it is that if you also wanted to drench them, it wouldn't impact the antibody response either, compared to doing like a fluke egg count or a fluke antigen elite, which will be impacted by a drench. If you wanted to do a blood test, that would be the best screen. I have certainly had people bring snails to me or send me photos of snails. And I've told this story a couple of times at farmer events and always gets a bit of a laugh. But I once had a client that was concerned about some snails that she found on her property. And so she got some of the water that she found near and put them all in a drink bottle and handed it to me when I was at a farm visit one day. And I said, yeah, I'll take them home and I'll look up that there's a very specific way you can identify if it's the right snail or not. And so I took them home with me. I put them on my desk in my office. And a couple of nights later, completely forgot what that water bottle was there for. And I was up quite late doing some invoicing and I got quite thirsty. And I reached for this water bottle. I thought, oh, quite convenient, and grabbed the water bottle down off the bench. And thankfully noticed fairly quickly that there was a whole heap of snail in it. But gave me a fair fry.
Yeah.
So now I have a rule that if you're going to give something to me in a water bottle, it has to be transferred into a proper sample jar straight away.
Now, if we do suspect that we got fluke, what are the animals going to be looking like, and does it change from sheep to cattle?
I often find the sheep will look a lot sicker than the cows, but the clinical signs are quite similar. So unlike other worms, you may not necessarily see scouring because it doesn't impact the intestines or the gastrointestinal tract in any way. Sometimes the clinical signs can range from just a little bit of weight loss, ill thrift, don't look like they're functioning particularly well, poor coat, those sorts of subclinical things. But in the really severe, borderline terminal cases, we'll see quite marked weight loss, and also we'll start to see a bottle jaw start to accumulate under the jaws of both sheep and cattle. Kind of similar to the bottle jaw you'd be used to seeing in barber's pole as well. So the reason for that is because of a low blood protein level. So protein in the bloodstream is sort of the glue that attracts all the water and the plasma component of blood to stay where it's meant to be. It's to do with the electrical charge of those proteins. So when the protein levels are not adequate, the water content of the blood, it quite literally just falls out of the bloodstream and it gathers in areas that are gravity dependent. So often that ends up being under the jaw.
Right. And so you said it's liver and blood. Is there anemia with fluke as well at times?
Sometimes, but not always, because it's a liver problem. So it's not so much because things like barber's pole where, the protein is being taken directly out of the bloodstream. It's more because the liver is responsible for making blood proteins. And so, sometimes they'll be anemic, but not always. And it's more so to do with, the fact that the liver's not producing enough blood proteins. And so certainly, when you're looking at a sheep and, its membranes are still nice and pink, but it's got that big bottle jaw, I'd be starting to think maybe that's more likely to be liver fluke than a barber's pole, because obviously, with the barber's pole, if it's got that bottle jaw appearance, it's probably going to be quite pale if it was because of barber's pole. Whereas, if we had a more sort of pink looking gum and eye colour, we'd be more thinking liver fluke.
Right. Now, with the liver, does the fluke actually do irreversible damage like other diseases to the liver? Or if we control the fluke, does the liver sort of heal and no long-term effects?
The liver is a really remarkable organ at regenerating in the face of disease. So in some cases, there can be permanent liver changes, but if it's mild, sometimes animals can really surprise you with how well they bounce back. The other thing we can see as a bit of a unique thing with liver fluke is there is also a syndrome called black disease, and that's part of the clostridial vaccinations that we vaccinate for. And the reason is that we can get this sort of sudden death syndrome because the liver fluke carry a strain of Clostridium along with them into the liver, and then they can cause an acute, like septicemic type crisis because of the liver fluke dragging these bacteria through the liver as well. So I've never personally seen it. It's just something that we got taught about at university, and thankfully, because most people have got good sound Clostridial vaccine protocols in place, it's not something we see very often, but it can pop up also.
Right, we just mentioned vaccines then, and you did mention about drenching. What drenches do control fluke, and are there issues with resistance creeping into the area?
Yeah, there aren't as many options for controlling liver fluke as what we've got for your average worms. So we don't have as many active ingredients available to us. Generally speaking, for both sheep and cattle, we like to do a like an all-stage wormer in sort of May, June. So we're sort of coming up to that period now. And we also like to do a fluke drench that just covers adults in sort of August, September as well. And the reason we do those two sort of strategic timings is because when we think about the life cycle and the environmental stability of the eggs and the metaria and miracidia in the environment, the eggs are very susceptible to freezing. So in temperatures a little less than 10 degrees, there is a lot less development of eggs into the and then the metasecariae through winter. So they essentially just go dormant and don't survive outside of the host particularly well. So what we say for those strategic controls is obviously, over winter, which is, late May, June, July. If we give them a drench that covers all light stages going into winter, it means that there's going to be a lot less of parasite load over winter. So there's actually a really good publication on the New South Wales DPI fact sheet that goes through which drenches will cover what life cycles of the fluke to make sure that you're giving the correct drench at the correct time. So when we get to sort of that May, June period, there's going to be a whole array of liver fluke ages from the most immature all the way up to fully grown adult fluke. And because when we get to that May, June drench period where, drenching, reflecting what's been accumulated over the previous months. And so there's going to be lots of fluke at the different age statuses at that May, June sort of drench. So we generally recommend a complete clean out at that point. So that some examples are like the triclobendazole type drenches. They cover all the way down to 2 weeks of age. So when we're thinking about those immature phases, all the way down to 2 weeks. Versus there's also a couple of other products that have got nitroxanol and chlorsulon in them as well that are considered, very broad mature phase coverage. And then, so what we do then is we give that drench in May, June. And, you won't get absolutely everything because they all have a reach back of down to about 2 weeks in terms of maturity. So basically, if a liver fluke is less than 2 weeks of or 2 weeks of age inside the animal, you may get a few that seep through that crack, but it's certainly better than nothing. And then over winter, any of those very, very immatures that weren't covered by the multi-stage one in May, June, they should be adults by the time winter is finished. So then we give them an adulticide at the end of winter, and that's usually like an Ivomec chlorsulon combination, something like that, because they will cover just the adults and they're often a lot cheaper in price. And so, if you cover just the adults at the end of winter, then you should be starting a new transmission sort of with minimal liver fluke being hung on. And so, if you do those 2 times a year, it should minimise the amount of, metasecariae and miracidia that accumulate in the environment, but also minimise the amount of liver fluke that accumulate within the cattle.
Right. So your clients that have got fluke on the property, are they doing those 2 biennial drenches every year round, are they?
Yeah, for the ones that they know have an endemic sort of problem, that's what they do. And there are some properties that will also, for really high risk loads, do an extra product through sort of summer as well, because maybe they might accumulate too much liver fluke during the infestation period, during that infective period, which is sort of from the end of winter until the next winter. So sometimes there might be another drench thrown in amongst them, particularly with the younger stock. Like all worms, the adults tend to learn to live with it a lot better. It's more so the younger stock that quite often need a bit of extra help. So quite often with weaning time, for example, they may often cop a liver fluke drench in, at that sort of January, February time at weaning as well for young stock to just help them out a little bit more.
I mentioned before resistance. Are we seeing resistance to certain drugs at the minute, or are we pretty good at this area?
We personally don't see major problems with it, but we know that it's around. So there have been case reports of liver fluke resistance to triclobendazole and off memory some for albendazole as well. So there is some case reports of it happening. It's really hard to find good data in that sort of space. Liver fluke drench resistance is a bit of an emerging topic at this point in time. Melbourne University are actually doing some work on it at the moment, though. So we're sort of working with them to deliver them samples to give them a bit of an idea of what sort of incidents we're dealing with in the field and that sort of thing. So that's, I think, a really much needed project to sort of answer those sorts of questions.
Right. Now, you mentioned at the very start that we're producers of selling some cull cows now, getting kill sheets back and the health data sheets stating that they might have like fluke damage. You want to talk us through that a little bit, and what do producers need to actually be mindful of when they're reading those sheets?
Yeah, the problem we do see occasionally is that because of the way that cattle health is reported, we are seeing a lot of cases where cattle have got scarring that may indicate that they've had liver fluke in the past, or they could have had some other liver disease, particularly if they're grazing things like heliotrope or Patterson's curse. There can be a bit of scarring on the liver from those sorts of toxic plants. But unfortunately, with some of the code that get thrown out by the health data in some processing plants, that it will falsely record them as being fluke, and it's potentially not. What we do say is to keep an eye out for the code that says viable fluke or V fluke, because that means that they've actually sliced the liver open and physically seen liver fluke. But the problem with that fluke code on some the animal health reporting systems is that it may not actually be fluke at all. And we've certainly gone out and done screening tests on farms where they'd had those reports and there's been no antibody evidence of liver fluke that we can find. So I think it's just worth treating them with caution, and certainly we provide as a service where we are quite happy to receive animal health data, and we can follow it up with contacts in the plant industry to sort of get to the bottom of what that might mean.
Yeah. So, and is this quite a common thing, do you think?
Yeah, it certainly can be. So I know that a bit of work is being done, I think, behind the scenes to try and, I guess, standardise that animal health reporting, because it does, and it's not just for liver fluke, but other conditions as well that can sometimes, give us some results that are very difficult to interpret. So it certainly, it can cause a lot of anxiety for producers, I think, to get those health data reports that, can really give quite frightening looking results when sometimes it may not be as bad as what it seems. So.
No, it's good to remember. Don't jump to the drench gun straight away, but dig a little bit deeper before we worry too much about it. Anything else that you need to mention before we start to think about signing off?
Probably just to get that strategic timing right with the drenches. And I do hear of a lot of drenches being used at times where I just think like you say, the most expensive drench is the one that's not working, but also making sure you're getting optimal bang for your buck at, getting that strategic timing right as well. So you're getting a good return on investment. One resource that I think is absolutely phenomenal for people that would like to read more about liver fluke is the Wormboss website. So everything I've said today in terms of that strategic timing, you can find on their website. They've got some really good drench protocols for sheep and cattle, and you can filter it depending on where you live as well. So they've got it for all different locations and climates as well. And they've got some really good drench decision guides for sheep as well. And Another website or resource that I found really good for learning about liver fluke is the New South Wales DPI fact sheets as well. They are really comprehensive and really well written. So yeah, if anyone's looking for further information, that's the two places I would go.
Yep, no, that's good, Chelsea. And we won't hold you up any longer so you can get off to this conference the other side of Melbourne. But we're actually changing up our last question. It's not really a question anymore, but it's actually one quote that you think our listeners would appreciate hearing from you. So every month you're going to come up with either a genuine, one of your own quotes, or one that you've heard. So you have been warned about this. So what quote have you got just before we sign off?
No, this one was not too hard to think of, actually. Not sure if you've seen the movie The Big Short.
No, I've heard of it, but no, I haven't seen it.
So it's about the global financial crisis. And it's not a Big Short quote, but it's actually a Mark Twain quote that pops up at the start. And that quote is, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just isn't so.
And come again, a bit slower this time for me, Chelsea.
It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for certain that just isn't so.
Yeah, I like that one.
So it was a time of that movie based on, I think, the assumption of a lot of bankers that because banking was going a certain way, that it would just inevitably continue to go down that same trajectory. But yeah, great movie and a great quote. So.
Yeah, if you're looking for something to do on a Friday night, grab that movie and a bit of light watching. But thanks again, Chelsea, for coming in. Enjoy your conference and try and get a bit of R&R while you're over there, and we'll catch up with you next month.
Great. Thanks again, Al, for having me.
Bye for now. A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.